Hi, good morning, everybody. Welcome to Golden Shovel's expert webinar series. I'm Aaron Bressois. I'm CEO of Golden Shovel Agency. I'm just really excited about today's webinar and discussion that we're going to have. We have a real special guest, Harry Moser, and our topic today is turning national catastrophes into local opportunity. So allow me to introduce Harry, and then we're going to do a presentation, then we'll be both going back on video to do some questions and take some questions, and I have a few for him also. So that's how today will roll. Just for housekeeping, classic Zoom stuff, we will have slides available. There will also be video available of this afterwards. So feel free to take notes, but you can also get copies of these later on, and we'll send those out to you. We're going to be, since it's a classic webinar, feel free to type in your questions. There's a question box at the bottom, and we'll get to those after the presentation. So without any further ado, let me introduce Harry Moser. So after 25 years at the helm of GF AgieCharmilles, now GF Machining Solutions, as North American president and subsequently chairman emeritus, Harry founded the Reshoring Initiative to help bring manufacturing jobs back to the US, largely due to the success of the Reshoring Initiative. Harry was inducted into the Industry Week Manufacturing Hall of Fame 2010 and was named Quality Magazine's Quality Professional of the Year for 2012. He participated in President Obama's 2012 Insourcing Forum at the White House, won the January 2013 the Economist Debate on Outsourcing and Offshoring, and received the Manufacturing Leadership Council's Industry Advocacy Award in 2014. He has degrees in mechanical engineering and an MS in engineering from MIT, as well as an MBA from the University of Chicago. So just really excited to be here. Harry, welcome. And today, I just have to say from my conversations with Harry previous to this, what he's doing is some of the more innovative approaches to being able to attract businesses, right? And I think right now, especially during COVID, where there's a lot of lockdown and hard to travel, has a really unique process for finding holes in supply chains that can allow us to really target companies that are going to be a good fit, and in a funny way, go to them and see if they'd be interested in moving versus waiting for ones that are just looking to expand. And without that, I'll let Harry tell the rest of it. Harry, thank you. Welcome.
Thank you, Aaron. Appreciate it very much. You passed the test. You were able to say AgieCharmilles correctly, and that shows a lot of skill on your part.
Excellent.
I want to, if I were with you, I'd wave because I know several of you who have told me you were going to be here today, and so I appreciate your coming out. It's good to have friends and have people in the industry that are interested in taking advantage of this opportunity, because it is an opportunity. We've had a disaster between with the COVID crisis. It's made a mess of the economy, but between that and the trade war and other things that are happening in the world, it's the perfect time to bring work back. There's lots of work coming out of China. Most of it's going to Vietnam, Cambodia, Mexico, places like that. Maybe 15% is coming here. But if we do our job right, if I help you correctly, and if you take advantage of it, that could be 25 or 30% of it coming to the United States, and could make a huge difference in your local economies. So I'm going to take you through this, and I hope you'll take advantage of what we have to show you. Give you a little more background on me. I grew up in Elizabeth, New Jersey, and the biggest thing in town was Singer Sewing Machine. And this was the factory in its heyday. At the time, about 1900, 1910, 2.6 million square feet, 5,000 workers. It was the largest factory in the world when the US dominated world manufacturing. And I drove past there 10 years ago, and I thought about my father, who'd run a third of the factory. My grandfather had been a foreman there. I worked there summers. I drove past, and nothing is made there anymore. Singer is entirely imported. And I cried then for what I had lost. And in my years selling equipment, machine tools and things like that, I passed company after company, industry after industry that used to be the leaders in the world, and they were gone. So I couldn't sell them equipment, and the country had suffered irreparable, like let's say very severe damage from their demise. So the purpose of the Reshoring Initiative and the tools I'll give you is to repair that damage, to bring manufacturing back. Now, the reality is because of the decline that's happened, manufacturing output at best is plateauing, as you can see here on the screen, down from a decent rate in the past to a much lower rate, probably overstated rate because the way the government calculates value added in manufacturing. The result of this is that manufacturing share of GDP, and I suspect in all of your communities, is down substantially from maybe 27% in the mid 90s to about 12% today. So manufacturing down substantially as a percentage of the GDP. But we talk about being a service economy, but we are still very much a consumption of goods economy. So the consumption of goods has grown at about 2.5% for the last 12 years at least, a lot longer. And that's faster than the economy's grown. So it isn't that we are not consuming goods, it's just to a significant extent, we're not making the goods, we're importing them. So as a result, our trade deficit has gone from a trade surplus back in the late 40s, 50s, 60s to break even around 1979, and then a substantial increase in the trade deficit, winding up now at about $800 billion per year. That's goods trade deficit, about $800 billion per year, which represents about 5 million lost manufacturing jobs, about 40% of our current manufacturing employment, due to that trade deficit. And as a result, manufacturing employment in your community, everywhere I go, manufacturing employment has fallen from about 27% of total US employment to about 9%. And some people will say that's inevitable. It happened to agriculture, it will happen to manufacturing. It hasn't happened to Germany, hasn't happened to Japan. It did happen to the US. And my objective is to help you counteract that trend. When you put those last two slides together, you see that our decline in manufacturing and our trade deficit correlate very strongly. So it's clear, and all noted economists that have studied this conclude that the vast majority of our drop in manufacturing employment is due to offshoring. It's not due primarily to automation. In fact, manufacturing productivity improvement for the last 12 years has averaged only 0.4%. So it's not the robots that are taking our job primarily. Primarily, it's a loss to offshore. Now, why did we lose so much? Well, I broke it down into three categories here. From the macro or economic perspective, U.S. currency has gone up about 300% against our trading partners in the last 40 years. As a result, wages here are higher than they would be if the dollar had not go up. This is partially driven by the U.S. being the reserve currency. China joining the World Trade Organization. People thought of it as opening China to the world, and I call it opening the world to China, because China turned out to be the predator, and we have significantly been the prey. And consumers demanding the lowest price thing that they can find, and to too great an extent, choosing university over skilled trades, and if they went to university, choosing liberal arts over engineering. So as a result, we have not had the skilled workforce that Germany has that allows them to have wages as high or higher than ours, work fewer hours per year, and still have a huge trade surplus where we have a huge trade deficit. The companies obviously bear a lot of the blame. They're too-time, short-term focused. We invest about a third as much in CNC machine tools as do the Chinese, and we have a third as many robots per 1,000 workers as the Koreans, South Koreans, even though those countries, the wage rates are substantially lower than ours, and you think we would be automating, instead they're automating. TCO, I mentioned there in the lower right-hand corner, total cost of ownership. As I will show you as we go along, that's the key to helping companies decide to bring the work back. Fortunately, we've started to get a restoring effect. We've started to have the work come back to the US, and we see reshoring or onshoring. Some people call it one, some call it the other. That's bringing the work back to the country. It's primarily work that products that will be sold here. We think it's wonderful for GM to build a factory in China and sell there, or India and sell there, but we're concerned only about the products that will be sold here. Foreign direct investment, wonderful way for you to work economic development. And it's really the same logic as reshoring. In both cases, the company decides they'd rather supply the US market or the North American market from within the market instead of from outside the market. Localization, same logic, producing near the consumer. Nearshoring, a related topic, when work has been, say, in Asia or Europe, and it comes back to Mexico or Canada, we call that nearshoring. And my first preference is for the work to come to the US, but if the work is so labor intense that you can get it from China to Mexico and be profitable, but you cannot get it to the US, I'd rather have it go to Mexico, because product coming out of China has about 5% US content, whereas product coming out of Mexico has about 40% US content. So getting it to Mexico is much better than leaving it somewhere far away. Fortunately, we've had some other favorable trends. This shows the change in unit labor costs. So the labor cost expressed in dollars to produce a typical product. And all the values for the different countries were indexed to 0 back in the year 2000. And then each year going forward adjusted for wage rate increases in each country, currency changes to get it back to the dollar, and productivity. And you can see US is flat. Other countries wobble around with currency changes, but the big change is China. They're up here to 500. So the labor content of a typical item expressed in dollars now is 5 times as high as it was in 20 years ago, and the US has stayed constant. So China has gone from wages that were so low you couldn't even almost bother to measure them, to a point where they're now losing work because their costs have gone up. Now, again, the tendency, as I mentioned, is for that work to go to Southeast Asia, India, Mexico, somewhere else. But if you use the tools I'll present, you can bring more of it to your region or your company. So some other reasons things have been going well. E-commerce. When you order something from Prime, you expect it today or tomorrow. And if there's a lot of orders, as we've seen on some items in the last few months, they stock out. And when they stock out, if they have to rely on something being surface freighted in from China or India, they're going to be out for a while, unacceptable. Whereas if they're getting them from a local company that can deliver within a couple of days, they're not going to stock out. Automation makes the relatively high wages of the US less of an issue. The tolls, the tariff from President Trump, arguably good or bad, depending on your industry, but certainly have made imports more expensive. Tendency by American consumers to prefer a made in USA product. It was always there, but it's much stronger today. Lots of surveys say 60% maybe would strongly prefer to buy a made in USA product if they can find one, and maybe 30-40% would pay an additional 10 or 15%, often enough to overcome or offset the cost differences between the two countries. A lot of work by industry has helped. Lean, which is eliminating waste in the company. The work of Deming, I'll talk about a little more later, who is the guru of the quality movement. All these things have helped make the US more competitive. One of the things I think you should all take advantage of is a statement from the Business Roundtable. 181 of the biggest company CEOs, including the ones here, most of whom you recognize, in August of 2019 signed a statement saying that the purpose of a business is no longer just to take care of the shareholders, but also the employees, the community, and the suppliers. Okay, and so, but when these companies offshored, they hurt their employees, their communities, and the suppliers. And this is the time to appeal to them to do what their CEO signed up for and reconsider bringing that work back to the country. So, based on all these favorable trends, this shows the cumulative manufacturing job announcements from 2010 when we started to 2019 now. So it's up to about 900,000. So 900,000 of the roughly 12 million US manufacturing employment as of before COVID was due to reshoring and FDI. So we've gone from about 6,000 per year in 2010 to a peak of 190,000 per year in 2017, and then falling off a bit in 2018 and 2019, primarily due to the trade war. Another way of looking at this is global trade growth. Now, some people worship global trade, and we say, what's the value of putting something in a container, shipping it halfway across the world for 4 weeks or 6 weeks, and when you could make the same thing locally? So global trade certainly has its place, will always continue, but you can see the world is thinking about it, and has the growth rate of global trade has gone from about 4.8% to about minus 0.1%. And in 2019, it dropped, even though world GDP grew at about 2.9%. So global trade as a percentage of world GDP dropped by about 3%. This year is going to be even more dramatic. A study by the OECD has concluded that as automation occurs, offshoring will be less. They expect reshoring as a parallel trend to robotics adoption, and that as offshore wages increase, we'll see more reshoring. So OECD, which is as globalist a group as you can find, recognizes that the trend that I'm describing and helping you enable is real and is happening. So that 5 million manufacturing jobs I described, I believe, are the best solution for our nations, and I'd say many of your community's biggest problems. And we've seen the tragedy of disadvantaged inner city populations. I saw an interview once with a teenage gang, person in jail, and they asked him, what would it have taken for you to, maybe he's 20 years old, what would it have taken for you to not pursue the gang and crime? And he said about $12 an hour. In other words, a job. So, coming down the list, the rural opioid epidemic, the need to recovery from the current COVID unemployment. I see retail with about 16 million employment dropping probably 25% of that due to the long-term effects of COVID, due to having had way too much capacity before, due to Amazon and other online sources. So there's going to be lots of unemployed retail workers. There's going to be vacant strip malls near potential employees in your communities. Think about converting those strip malls into small boutique and machine shops, and not polluting, not foundries, not steel mills, but the kind of companies that can support the bigger companies in the area. We're facing huge budget deficits, trillions and trillions of dollars that the government's spending now. There's going to be a need for less spending and more tax revenues. Best way to do that, as with all these things, is to bring the work back, put the people to work, let them pay taxes, and help us get out of this mess that we're in. So some other societal benefits. You're all familiar with the importance of skilled workforce, number one criterion for site selection, and it's tough to recruit kids, high school kids, into the manufacturing skilled workforce. because they all think they've got to go to university, and they tend to think that manufacturing is in decline because the work's going offshore. So why would I want to go into that? So by showing them that reshoring is happening in your community, you'll increase that recruitment, which will make your region more attractive. Pollution comes down when you reshore. We can have both productivity and manufacturing employment, so the best of both worlds. So I see an economy that was running along pretty happy with cheap imports. The tariffs in 2019 got people's attention. They had sort of an intellectual understanding of the trade deficit, and then COVID came along, and we have emotion and fear. We have death. We have people worried about losing their job, worried about losing members of their family, and seeing that a lot of the loss has been due to our supply chain not being capable of making the products that were needed, the ventilators, the gowns and the masks and the gloves. So you can see all these kind of products here that we were 95% dependent on imports, especially from China. And therefore, when we had to double, triple, quadruple our consumption, we did not have any capacity, had almost no capacity from which to grow. Therefore, very slow response, therefore people dying. And the same kind of dependencies exist in other areas. So rare earth minerals over here, very dependent on China. 5G, discrete electronic components. The military puts out a report every year on the components and materials they cannot find domestically, and therefore they're dependent on other countries, including in some cases China. Apparel, we're 97% dependent on imports. Machine tools, the industry I came from, the majority of the product comes from offshore. So if we even want to increase our production of things that we need, we're dependent on others to provide the equipment to do so. And so we've been in a conditions, and companies now understand that you've got a factory here in the United States, and you were hurt a while back by the Fukushima tsunami in Japan, shut down production there for quite a while. The COVID crisis in China, starting there, the Thai floods, the volcanoes in Iceland that stopped flights coming over from Europe. So all these things, and in some cases our own fault. The longshoremen strike in LA, all these things break the supply chain. And companies say, wow, this is bad. I've got to do something about that. And the best solution for them to do when they've got a factory somewhere here in the US is to source as much as they can of their critical components as close as possible to that factory. Now, ideally, all within your town or your state, acceptably within the country, perhaps some coming from Mexico, some coming from Canada, but much more dependable, much more resilient, much safer supply chains than to have them scattered all over across the world. So and yet companies or commentators would say, yeah, that's great, sounds wonderful, but the US is too expensive. We'll have too much inflation, we can't afford it, no one will accept it. And I say, not if the companies use TCO, total cost of ownership. And the reality is that most of them do not. They look only at the wage rate, only at the purchase price. What do I pay at the factory for that product? Or maybe the landed cost, which would include duty and freight, but they ignore roughly 20% of the total cost. And when they ignore that much, they're often making the wrong decision. And that's the opportunity for you to help them. So here's an example of that. We have online on our website, free to use, the total cost of ownership estimator. And this is an example of that usage. In this case, the Chinese ex-works price or FOB price was 70. The US price was 100. So the supply chain manager would look at that and say, wow, obvious, that's 30% difference. That's $30 a unit. I'm going to buy 12,000 a year. That's $360,000 of annual difference. I'm of course going to buy it in China because that's a third of my objective. I'll get my bonus. I'll get promoted. What have you. But when they do total cost and see that for China, it's now 98. In the US, it's 108. Now it's a 10% difference. And projecting the current trends in wages and currency forward, see that the total cost in China in a couple of years will be higher, then it's feasible to convince that company not to send new work over and to start expanding, hiring, finding local suppliers in the community to strategically bring the work back to over the next couple of years. So to put a little more understanding on that, here's a chart of China ex-works price or FOB price as a percentage of US price. So what it costs at the factory door for the exact same product done by people, hundreds of people who've compared China to the US using our TCO estimator. And you can see that the mode, the peak of this curve, so more or less a normal distribution, is around 72%. And very little of the curve is to the right of the 100, because at the right of 100, the US price is lower than the Chinese price. But when the people calculated total cost, now the mode is around 85%, and dramatically more of the work is to the right of the 100, where the US is less expensive than China. And if there happened to be a 15% Trump tariff in effect, then the curve, the mode shifts over to about 98%, and a substantial portion of the area of the curve is to the right of the 100. So to help that be more clear, I've repositioned the data so we can see that for price, about 8% of the cases the US won, whereas for total cost, about 32%, and if there was a Trump tariff, then about 46%. So just by doing the math correctly, the company can go from single digits, mid-single digits, up to 30, 40% of the work. So conservatively, I'd say 20 to 30% of the work that is being imported into the country, into your state, into your community, could be, the company could be convinced to bring back to the United States. As an example of the effectiveness of this, I worked with this company, Moser. They make printed circuit boards, a very good company. And they were about to lose their biggest customer to a lower priced Chinese offer. And the VP sales and I did the calculation, did the TCO estimator analysis. He took a copy of that into that customer, showed it to the customer, and I have a quote from him saying that that was the key to saving or winning a $60 million order. And you know, how happy would the community, the companies in your community be to help them with a $1 million order, and maybe a $60 million order? So some of the costs that are in total cost, some of the factors that you should be aware of, we break it into hard and soft kind of costs. So the hard costs, freight, normal duties, travel to go visit the supplier, packaging, more for 6 weeks on the water than for local in a truck. Inventory carrying costs can be substantial. The ability to do just-in-time delivery from the local supplier, so it doesn't even have to go on the shelf at all. And then there's risks and strategic factors like emergency air freight when the quality wasn't there in the last shipment, or there's been a surge in demand. The ability for the engineering people in the US at the company to talk to the manufacturing people, because once again, they're in the same building or in the same community. The value of made in USA, the reduction of the risk of stocking out, lower intellectual property risk. In China, companies are typically forced to put their data on servers in China, which are accessible by the Chinese government. Is that better for your companies or better for them to be here? Quality differentials can be substantial. So I mentioned Deming before. He's famous, wrote Out of the Crisis. He got the US going on quality. And he says that we should stop buying on the basis of price, instead minimize total cost. Very simple, very clear, but companies don't do it. So by doing so, by looking at the total cost, by seeing that there's maybe only a small total cost gap instead of a huge price gap, they can more easily justify investment in your community. process improvement to further reduce their own cost, automation, training, etc. And so instead of sacrificing quality delivery community, employees to get their costs down and their price to their customers down, instead, if they do the math correctly and they invest and automate here, in many or most cases, here is a good solution. When you go to work on this at a company, procurement may not be interested. They may say, no, I'm rewarded on the basis of price, and I want my bonus, I want my promotion, I'm not interested. And so you or companies that are trying to accomplish this have to go, in some cases, around procurement, talk to manufacturing, talk to engineering, talk to the people responsible for inventory and quality, those who would like to have a made in USA product. So we've had cases of companies where the general management has taken away from procurement the right to pick the country of source so that the needs of the whole company can be considered rather than just the procurement silo. So the methodologies we suggest would be to help OEMs buy smarter and suppliers sell smarter. For example, at the OEMs, if I'm at a company and the president or the general manager says, Harry, where should we start? We 1,000 parts we're importing from offshore. Which one should we start with first? I say, tell me about the parts where you have pain, where you're losing orders because of delivery, where the warranty issues have been substantial, where you have too much inventory. Typically, you'd expect inventory to be cut by 50%, 50%. Travel, late night telephone call, any of these issues, IP risk, any of these issues, Trump-China tariffs, if there's substantial Trump tariffs, that's a very good indicator that that the product will be more competitively produced here. So I'd start with those. I'd build alignment within the company from groups like the lean people, the green, those who are worried about the pollution, regulatory compliance, quality. Any of these people will understand your view and help you convince procurement. So I've outlined here the reasons why companies choose to reshore, because if you can appeal to the companies that have not reshored and show them the benefits other companies are gaining from reshoring, that should make it easier to make the argument. So government incentives, you know about those. If you do everything else right, you shouldn't need as much of them. Impact on the domestic economy, they bring the work back here, the economy grows, they sell more. Automation and technology, your training, the training at your community college and in your high school can play a role in that, as obviously in skilled workforce. Again, training, helping the companies get trained on lean and processes like that can be critical. A lot of that can be done, for example, through the MEPs, the Manufacturing Extension Partnerships. So mentioning a skilled workforce, we work closely with an organization called MSSC, which provides the credentials for the most basic manufacturing and logistics skills. And they have, they put together this slide, which shows how the Site Selection Magazine survey consistently shows that workforce skills, workforce availability in manufacturing, in logistics, are the keys to site selection. And therefore, so I urge you, as one of the best ways to proceed with reshoring and FDI is to make sure that your community is especially strong in these areas. This is something that they offer. It's a kit, a toolkit for training manufacturing students. Those who are learning, relatively inexpensive compared to having a lot of machines, mobile, good for rural and urban areas where you otherwise can't afford $500,000, $1 million facility, and yet to get some good basics under their belt. That they also provide an index of the amount of credentials that have been awarded in a given community, and that can be a useful sales tool on your part. So we offer the Reshoring Initiative offers some programs to help. The first one, SBS, Siting and Buying Smarter, is to help the OEMs, the big companies, reshore either in-house or outsource to local suppliers. So in both cases, strengthening your community. ISP, Import Substitution Program, is to help your suppliers, the smaller companies, replace imports at OEMs locally and nationally. And then supply chain gaps is to help local companies or FDI fill national supply chain gaps. The kind of thing that if we'd all been smart enough, if I'd been smart enough a year ago to convince the companies to work on gowns and caps and masks and gloves and all these things, we'd all look pretty smart. So to make this visually understandable, I picked North Carolina here. And here's a factory, an OEM in North Carolina. And they're getting imports of components and products from all over the world, as are other US companies, for example, in California. And so with the Siting and Buying Smarter, that company in North Carolina would expand and put in an addition and hire some more people. And it would purchase more from local North Carolina companies and less from offshore. At the same time, those suppliers in North Carolina would sell to companies around the country, replacing imports that those companies had been bringing in. And you would bring in, for example, foreign direct investment to fill supply chain gaps. So supply chain gaps are where there's a lot being imported and nothing or almost nothing is being produced, and therefore would be a great investment for that company and wonderful for your community. So to give you just a little more detail on the biggest program, the import substitution program, we work with a given company and they identify products they're really good at making. They're one of the best in your region or in the country. And then we can identify who the biggest importers are of those products, what the company name is, the address, tons per year brought in, some idea of what the price is they're paid, who the offshore supplier is. And then we and you train those local companies to use the TCO estimator to convince that big company to buy from them instead of continuing to buy offshore. So that's essentially what I did for Moricorp, which I told you about with the $60 million order. Project status on this, just to let you see it's real. We're underway with MEPs, Manufacturing Extension Partnerships, in Illinois, the whole state, Cleveland and Dayton. We're close to starting it up in North Carolina and New York State. And we're also dealing with a combination of state and MEPs at one of the New England states. So we made excellent headway in this. This was sort of a hard sell a year ago, but everybody understands now, and we're delighted to have the opportunity to work with so many organizations. We also have another tool that could be helpful. I wrote an article, I did it with BLS, Biggins, Lacey, and Shapiro, Michelle Comerford, and it was to help a company. It was a hypothetical case, but it's a tool, a model. And it took the case of a German company, and they had a factory in Germany, and they were not selling in the US, but they were saying, should I ship from Germany, expand here and ship? Should I build a factory in China and get the low-cost labor and ship to the US, or should I put the factory in the US and be local? And so I went through a lot of analysis as to how to work that out, and this is how the conclusion came. With the U.S. having the best return on investment, but we acknowledged in the article that there are a lot of considerations that could have driven it to Germany to be the right conclusion or China to be the right conclusion. So it's a model that could help you when you're dealing with FDI, help the companies appreciate the benefits of being in the US, and in some cases understand that it's not the right fit for them, which is better because then you can go on to the ones that are likely to be the winners. So a quick summary, when you're encouraging reshoring and FDI use total cost. It's absolutely essential to get the companies to understand the realities. With the OEMs, the SBS program, the siting and buying smarter, and also, if I were in your case, I'd look for divisions of these business roundtable companies. They're all listed in the Business Roundtable website. If there's a good sized factory there, I'd call the general manager and say, how about cutting back on those imports and making it here? Your president says you're concerned about community, employees, and suppliers. For the suppliers, the import substitution program. For the FDI, supply chain gaps, and the ROI that I just described, I suggest partnering. The economic developer plus the MEPs, plus the state or local manufacturing association, the equipment suppliers. They'd love to help you convince the companies to bring the work back and have to buy equipment and become more productive. When you have reshored, promote it, get it in the newspaper, get it in the television, so you can get more recruitment of skilled workers. Consider broad regional collaboration. You know, if you're a 50,000 person community, it's hard to get the critical mass to make this happen. Whereas if you're a million person region or a 5 million person state, much easier to find the linkages between the small companies and the big companies. Promote online. I know that's something that Golden Shovel is great at, and we also encourage you to promote reshoring and FDI on your websites, and to help your local companies, especially the suppliers, appeal to their customers and show the benefits of reshoring to bring the work back to them. So we're a nonprofit with 25 sponsors. I founded it 10 years ago. You can see all of them here. We're honored by all of these groups who provide us with resources to enable us to bring this message to you and offer these tools. This is how we think of ourselves a little bit. This is the little Dutch boy, and he's standing there next to the dike that's keeping the North Sea out of Holland. And there's a hole and the water's coming out, and he says to himself, I could run and get the village elders, or I can put my finger in the dike and hold it all together and hope somebody finds me and saves the day. So conceptually, this was Harry when Harry had hair, and you're the village elders. And if you say, well, that's a nice talk, good luck, Harry, well then probably things don't get any better. But if you take this message and use it to drive reshoring in your communities, then your community, the country, will be better places for you, for your organization, for your children. So we're here to help you. You can call me, email me anytime. You've got my email address, you've got the phone number. Just ask for help. Simple things are free. Complicated, we charge a little for. But we're delighted to hear from any of you. Great to be with you today. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much. Well, that was incredibly informative. There are some questions coming in, and I have a couple of myself. Why don't we switch into a video discussion, and I'll pop back up. Hi. All right. That was incredibly interesting. One question came in and says, how many countries like China, or many countries like China, require that companies establish manufacturing operations in their countries as a prerequisite for doing business there? And the question was, are US companies choosing to make that commitment also versus reshoring, or are they looking into establishing manufacturing operations both domestically and in other countries?
I do not think that China requires companies to manufacture there to sell there. They have traditionally required companies that choose to manufacture there to share their intellectual property, because they typically had to take on a 51% local partner, and the local partner got access to all the data. Okay, so I'm quite sure one could sell there. like Boeing sells airplanes there and doesn't manufacture complete airplanes. They might buy on offset, they might buy components, but they don't make complete airplanes. So I'm sure they don't have to do that. And if you look at U.S. companies, why they put factories there, they had two motivations. One, they wanted to sell into the Chinese market, which was 1.3 billion people growing at 10% a year. That's a wonderful market. A lot of middle class coming out. And as long as they had the factory there, well, let's ship some inexpensive stuff back to the U.S. Okay, but now that Chinese market is probably this year not going to grow and may shrink, and due to their lack of competitiveness and the world being concerned about Chinese domination, China isn't going to grow as fast. We funded their growth. The world isn't going to fund their growth anymore, and therefore they will not be as attractive a destination for investment. Whereas as the U.S. reshores, we'll have the growth. We'll grow at maybe 3% instead of 2%, and it will be a better place to put those investments.
Great, thank you. Next, here's another one. What innovative initiatives are you seeing by U.S. economic developers that you might be able to point to?
Okay, well, I guess the most innovative ones I see are those who are cooperating with us, and we really appreciate them doing so. I know the work that you do at Golden Shovel, that you've had some excellent ability, especially during the crisis, to help communities show their assets at a time when people cannot travel. So that's certainly a very innovative thing to do. I guess those are the things that come first to mind. You know, I've had in the past very good results with Select USA, and many of you have probably attended that. Now I've gone maybe 4 times. Unfortunately, it was canceled this year, but I think that's an excellent opportunity to get access to opportunities, especially on FDI. But Select USA is now significantly also focused on reshoring. A couple of things I'd suggest. Also, the SBA has some programs that can be helpful for investment. And there's the Development Finance Corporation, DFC, which has billions of dollars, that's with a B, billions of dollars to fund reshoring, especially of health products, but also of other products. So there's money out there, and the EDOs are finding ways to use that money. There's also a lot of CARES Act money around. So a lot of the work that we're doing with the MEPs is CARES Act money. So smart to get that money, use it for projects like this.
Yeah, great. I'll just double down on the Select USA. As far as we're concerned, it's one of the most interesting and effective conferences that we attend. And just a pro tip for anybody listening in that hasn't been to Select USA, make sure to check out their meeting system that they have for setting up meetings and appointments. They have a really great online system for having 25-minute meetings. I think I met with 30, 40 people in 2 days, and it was really effective. So great conference. All right, Harry, how long is this going to take to reshore?
Well, that's a good question. Offshore, when I was just starting to work summers in high school, was in the late 1950s, okay? And offshoring was just starting. Cheap Japanese stuff, that companies laughed at it, and then within 10 or 15 years, it was really good Japanese product, okay? So we've had 50 years of offshoring, and we've hollowed out our industry, lost a lot of the skilled manufacturing workforce. It's going to take, I believe, to get to my goal, which is to balance the trade deficit, bring back 5 million manufacturing jobs, will take at least 20 or 30 years. And you know, the first problem is to convince the companies. There's things the government has to do to accelerate the process, skilled workforce, but also to make the U.S. more price competitive. Remember those curves I showed you? to shift those curves to the right so the company doesn't have to sharpen its pencil quite so much to understand the advantage of bringing it back. So I'd like to see the dollar down by 20 or 30%, to see a value-added tax, to see to retain the lower corporate income tax rates and the immediate expensing of investment. It's a skilled workforce. All these, if we do those things, it'll accelerate. If we continue at the current trend, with 190,000 jobs coming back in 2017, we probably broke even with the amount that were lost in 2017. You know? So to get net 5 million back, we'd have to double or triple the rate and do that for 20 or 30 years. Okay,
so it's a pretty long.
So it's a 20 or 30 year project, but it's the critical thing is as you get started, as the companies get educated, as the community sees the benefits, the recruitment gets easier, the companies invest more. They increase when the companies get busy and they get above 80% capacity utilization, they invest. And when they invest, then their productivity goes up. And as their productivity goes up and have new equipment, it's easier to recruit. And then they become more competitive, and then they can bring more back. And then you got a virtuous cycle that's going around like this, right? So
I can see why that takes a while, but along the 20, 30 years, there's so many benefits, it seems like along the way, even starting out.
And the other way of looking at it is if we don't start now, as I said, the Chinese and the are investing a lot more than we are. And instead of, if we don't become more competitive and balance things out, we're going to become less competitive and go down like this. So to me, there's only one choice: is to become more competitive and invest and train and reshore. You know?
Yeah. Wow. I'll take one more question. I think for the maybe squeeze in two. We've seen these types of efforts in the past as far as revitalizing manufacturing. And what makes the Reshoring Initiative so different?
Now is it's been proven that the work can come back. We've gone from 6,000 jobs per year to 190,000. So a huge increase. So we've proven feasibility. And second, the society has watched for 3 months, 4 months, the U.S. not having enough gowns and masks and gloves and all these other things because we don't make them, essentially don't make them. And you can't go from making almost nothing to making huge amounts in a week or a month. It takes a long time. And so people understand, the politicians understand. There's I think 8 bills in the Senate and the House to mandate or motivate at least the manufacture of health things, penicillin, things like that here. And then I'm confident that'll spill over. So you've got a lot of motivation in society. Mm-hmm. And we've got huge need, as I discussed, with urban and rural, unemployment and depression and all this stuff. So I think I'm sure the demand is there, and it will happen. And as far as comparing us to others, there's a lot of think tanks that talk about things, and I'd say difference is we go out, we provide the actual tools to actually get the job done. And so it's fun to write articles, but it's even more fun to see jobs come back.
Yeah, right. All right. Well, I'm going to get one more squeezed in here for the end of the hour. How do we convince the companies to source here or assemble and source here? You touched a little bit on the slides, but if you could just hit on that one more time.
Yeah, I would, if in an ideal case, and I'd work across the board, the big companies and small companies. If I had the whole state, if I could get the whole state behind it, or a whole major region like Cook County or something like that, I'd get the governor, the mayor, the congressmen, the senators to all take a position and support. To make a statement, to say, companies, we're not demanding that you reshore. We're asking you to reevaluate. Such that the companies, if you get that call from the mayor or the governor, you can't, then when the economic developer and the supplier comes around, they can't say, no, I'm not interested, go away, I don't have time. You have to say, yeah, I heard what the governor said. Yeah, let's take a look. Let's give it a fair shot. And so I think getting a broad coalition of visible public figures that can put some muscle to this, and then getting a team of economic developer, MEP, supplier, calling on the companies, encouraging them. It may not work on the first visit. Ideally, if you can get all the suppliers to make the pitch, the third or the fourth, the fifth one that calls on the procurement person, okay, let's do the math. Offer webinars and training sessions to train the big companies and to source smarter and to train the suppliers to sell smarter. It's a whole package. And you want to work the whole thing.
Great. That makes a lot of sense, getting the leadership to the table to show the companies how serious that they are and certain. Well, Harry, thanks so much. We have run out of time today. The presentation was very interesting for all the participants that are on. We'll have a recording of this available to follow up with, and we'll be sending that out to you guys. So thank you so much. Harry, thanks for joining us. And
thanks, everybody.
Feel free to reach out to him, or we'll catch you at the next webinar. Thanks.
Bye-bye.